The helicopter's blades thundered overhead, rattling every window in my ranch house, when suddenly I saw flashing red and blue lights tearing down my driveway. I thought the local sheriff's department had come to assist with the medevac, but then I noticed the decals on the SUVs. They weren't from any department I recognized. The words, HOA Enforcement Unit, were stenciled in bold letters on the sides, complete with a fake badge logo. My stomach dropped. I'd dealt with this HOA before. They were pushy, controlling, and obsessed with claiming my ranch was somehow within their jurisdiction, even though my property lay miles outside their development. But today, they'd crossed a line I didn't think even they would dare approach. The medevac helicopter had been called for a very real emergency. My ranch hand, Miguel, had been bucked off a panicked stallion while helping me herd some new horses into the corral. He'd landed badly, compound fracture, possible internal injuries. The local EMS couldn't get an ambulance up here quickly because a summer storm had washed out part of the main road. The only way to save him was by helicopter. Every second counted. But as the helicopter hovered into position, preparing to land in my open pasture, these self-appointed HOA cops roared in and started waving their arms at the pilot to divert. I rushed outside, yelling over the deafening roar of the rotors. "Get out of the way. This is a medical emergency." But the tallest one, a guy with mirrored sunglasses and a smug little grin, shouted back, "This airspace is restricted. HOA regulations prohibit unauthorized aircraft over community land." I almost laughed at the absurdity before rage took over. This is MY Ranch, and it's not your community land. Move before you kill someone. But they didn't budge. In fact, two of them moved their SUVs directly under the helicopter's approach path, forcing the pilot to abort the landing and circle again. Miguel was lying in the grass near the barn, pale and sweating, barely conscious. His breathing was ragged, and every minute we lost meant more blood loss and higher risk. I could see the fear in his eyes, and my own heart pounded with helpless fury. "Sir, we'll need you to comply," another fake officer said, stepping toward me. His badge was clearly just a cheap metal emblem from a novelty store, but he carried himself like he had real authority. HOA policy requires you to file a request for aerial landing 72 hours in advance. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. This isn't a barbecue or a pool party, this is life or death. The pilot came over the radio, shouting down at me, "We can't land until they clear the area, it's too dangerous." That was it. I'd had enough. These clowns weren't just wasting time, they were endangering Miguel's life. I pulled out my phone and hit a number I rarely used, a direct line to my old unit. Most people in town just knew me as a rancher, but before I retired, I'd served 20 years in a tactical SWAT team with the state police. And while I might be done with the job, I wasn't done with my brothers in the force. "Dispatch, this is Carter. We've got obstruction of a medical rescue, multiple impersonators posing as law enforcement. I need immediate response, bring the team." The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. "Copy that, Carter. SWAT's en route. ETA 6 minutes. 6 minutes. That's how long those fake HOA cops had to realize they'd made the biggest mistake of their lives. But instead of backing down, they doubled down. One of them got on a handheld radio, calling someone at their so-called HOA HQ, and bragging about neutralizing an airspace violation. I could hear the voice on the other end laughing and saying, "Good work, hold your ground." I moved over to Miguel, trying to keep him calm while also keeping my eyes on the intruders. They were pacing around like they owned the place, muttering about civil fines and legal violations. My blood boiled. Not only were they impersonating officers, but they were literally blocking life-saving aid. I felt my fists clench, but I held back. I knew I didn't need to touch them, because the real storm was on its way. In the distance, a different sound began to rise, deep, rapid, mechanical thumps. Not helicopter blades this time, but the low growl of armored engines. A dark, matte black Bearcat SWAT vehicle crested the hill, flanked by 2 tactical SUVs. The HOA imposters froze, the smugness draining from their faces. One of them tried to wave at the SWAT truck like they were on the same team. That didn't go well. The Bearcat didn't slow. It rolled right up, doors opening in perfect unison. 6 heavily armed SWAT officers poured out, rifles up, laser sights dancing across the imposters' chests. Down on the ground. Now. The command ripped through the air like a gunshot. The HOA goons hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for the lead SWAT officer to step forward and pin one against the hood of his SUV while another tackled the guy with the mirrored sunglasses. Within 30 seconds, every single one of them was face down in the dirt, wrists zip-tied, and their fake badges and radios tossed onto a pile. The helicopter, now clear to land, touched down in the pasture while SWAT secured the scene. Paramedics rushed to Miguel, loading him onto a stretcher and into the chopper. As the helicopter lifted off, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. Miguel was on his way to the trauma center, and the HOA imposters were on their way to jail. I walked over to the SWAT commander, an old friend from my days on the team. He shook his head. "Carter, when you call, I know it's serious, but HOA cops? That's a new one." I smirked. Yeah, they wanted to play law enforcement. Now they get to meet the real thing. The commander glanced at the still idling Bearcat, then at the line of cuffed imposters. "We'll also be paying their so-called HOA headquarters a visit." My grin widened. If they thought this was over, they were about to find out what a real raid looked like. And that's exactly what was about to happen next. The second I landed back at my ranch after dealing with the so-called fake HOA cops blocking the rescue helicopter, I knew this wasn't over. These people weren't just playing neighborhood politics, they were trying to exert real control, and they were willing to interfere with a medical emergency to do it. That crossed every line imaginable. My phone was still buzzing with messages from the rescue pilot, explaining how the HOA security had actually tried to wave the chopper off, claiming it was violating community airspace rules. Airspace rules? These guys didn't own a single inch of the sky, but they acted like they ran the Federal Aviation Administration. I stood in my kitchen, staring out at the stretch of land I called home. My ranch wasn't just some random property. It bordered the HOA community, but it wasn't part of it. Still, that never stopped them from trying to mess with me, parking on my land, sending fake fines, inspecting my fences without permission. But this time? This was different. They'd interfered with a life-saving mission. And as far as I was concerned, that was criminal. I didn't just call the sheriff. I called someone else, someone who owed me a favor. See, before ranch life, I served as a tactical advisor for a metropolitan SWAT team. The guys still remembered me as the guy who trained them on hostage rescue drills. I wasn't calling for a friendly chat. I was calling because I wanted this taken seriously, and I knew if I reported it through normal channels, it'd get buried under paperwork. "Let me guess," my old buddy from SWAT said when he answered. "You've got trouble again." "Not trouble. A deliberate obstruction of a medical flight," I told him. "And I've got proof. Video from the pilot's helmet cam, audio from their radio chatter. You're going to want to hear this." Within an hour, he was at my ranch. We sat at my dining table, watching the footage. The HOA cops, really just guys in knockoff uniforms and cheap badges, were on a ridge, waving their arms and using some kind of handheld radio to yell at the pilot. You could hear them shouting about violating HOA airspace, threatening to fine the pilot if he didn't leave. My friend's face went from amused to stone cold in about 30 seconds. "That's interference with an aircraft," he said flatly. "That's federal. These guys just handed you, and us, the keys to shut them down." Exactly what I wanted to hear. The plan formed quickly. The HOA HQ, a converted model home they used as an office, was where they stored all their paperwork, radios, and so-called enforcement gear. If we wanted to end this, we had to hit them where it hurt. I wasn't going in guns blazing, but I wasn't going to let them destroy evidence either. While SWAT got the legal side rolling, securing a search warrant based on the interference and trespassing, I stayed busy. I drove out to a couple of neighbors I trusted, people who had been quietly complaining about the HOA for years. Everyone had a story: fines for planting the wrong flowers, threats for parking in their own driveway, harassing elderly residents for not maintaining community standards. I recorded every word. By the time night fell, we had a fat file of evidence and sworn statements. The HOA thought they were untouchable. They thought they could play fake cop forever. They had no idea that by sunrise, they'd have real cops at their door, ones with actual badges and the legal authority to put them in handcuffs. But there was one more twist. Around midnight, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee, I saw headlights creeping down the dirt road toward my ranch. I didn't even have to think twice, it was them. Sure enough, two of the same fake HOA officers from earlier that day got out of their SUV and started walking toward my gate. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, hitting the record button. "Evening, gentlemen," I called out. They froze. "We're here to inform you," one said stiffly, "that your property is in violation of community noise restrictions due to helicopter activity earlier today." I almost laughed. That helicopter was here to save a life. You interfered with it. And in case you're wondering, that's a federal crime. Their faces paled. They mumbled something about just enforcing rules, and practically sprinted back to their SUV. I watched their taillights vanish into the night. I knew then that they were spooked. And that meant they'd probably try to destroy records before we arrived. So I made a call to SWAT. "Move up the timetable," I told my friend. "If we wait until morning, there won't be anything left." And that's how, less than 3 hours later, I found myself in the passenger seat of a SWAT van, rolling toward the heart of the HOA community under the cover of darkness. The raid was about to begin. The next morning, the air around my ranch was tense, almost electric, like the calm before a thunderstorm. I barely slept the night before. My mind replayed every moment of the fake HOA cops standing in my driveway, radios crackling, threatening to shut down unauthorized air traffic when they saw the rescue chopper hovering in the distance. It wasn't just about a helicopter anymore. They were interfering with an emergency medical evacuation. That was beyond illegal, it was dangerous. By sunrise, I was already on my porch, coffee in hand, scanning the tree line. I wasn't paranoid, I was prepared. And my gut told me they weren't done. Sure enough, around 9 a.m., a convoy of black SUVs rolled past my front gate. I recognized one of the plates from the night before. Same guys. Same fake badges. They didn't come up the driveway, but the message was clear: they were watching me. My phone buzzed. It was Captain Harris from the county sheriff's office. "We've got intel you might want to hear," he said. "These fake HOA enforcers? We've traced them back to a so-called operations center they've set up about 10 miles from your place. Looks like they've been playing cop for months, illegally." That was all I needed to hear. The county sheriff's department had already looped in the state police and SWAT. Interfering with an active rescue mission crossed a federal line, which meant the feds were paying attention, too. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute, this was a full-blown criminal investigation. I drove into town to meet with Harris and his team. They had a map spread across a conference table, marking the HOA's headquarters, a repurposed office building that looked normal on the outside but was heavily fortified inside. Cameras on every corner. Blacked-out windows. Even a shortwave radio tower on the roof. According to Harris, they had been issuing fake citations, harassing landowners, and using counterfeit police gear to intimidate anyone who stood up to them. "This is a big operation," Harris said, tapping the map. "They've got a server room that's probably storing all their illegal records, video, financials, false fines, everything. If we get our hands on that, we can put them away for a long time." I looked him dead in the eye. "Then what are we waiting for?" He smiled. "We're not. SWAT is staging right now." By late afternoon, I was back at my ranch, pacing the porch as unmarked tactical trucks rolled quietly down the dirt road toward the HOA's base. The plan was precise: breach, secure, confiscate evidence, and detain anyone posing as law enforcement. I wasn't going to the raid itself, I wasn't law enforcement anymore, but Harris had promised to keep me updated in real time. Then, just as the team was getting into position, I heard it again. The sound of rotor blades in the distance. Another helicopter. This time, it wasn't a rescue chopper, it was news media. Apparently, word had leaked about the fake cops interfering with a medevac, and now reporters were circling like hawks. That added pressure. If SWAT didn't move fast, the HOA might destroy their evidence before the breach. Over the radio, I could hear snippets of SWAT chatter: Unit 1, breaching main door. Unit 2, secure the radio tower. My pulse raced as I imagined the scene: heavily armed officers moving through hallways, breaking down locked doors, seizing radios, computers, and stacks of counterfeit citations. 10 minutes into the raid, Harris called me. "We've got them. Half a dozen in custody, more coming. And get this, inside, they had an entire wall covered with aerial photos of your ranch, your landing pad, even the chopper routes. They were tracking your property like it was a military target." That chilled me more than I expected. This wasn't just about some power-hungry HOA wannabes, they had been targeting me personally, likely because I'd stood up to them before. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, the raid was over. SWAT had cleared the building, seized their equipment, and transported the fake officers to county lockup. I finally exhaled, the tension in my shoulders releasing for the first time in days. But as Harris told me later, this isn't over. They've got more people in the wings: funders, planners, people who think they're untouchable. We're going after them next. And as I stood on my porch that night, watching the Real police helicopters fly over with their spotlights cutting through the dark, I knew one thing for certain: this war with the fake HOA had just entered a new phase, and I wasn't going to let my guard down for a second. By the time SWAT arrived at the HOA headquarters, the place looked like a fortress. Floodlights lit up the front lawn, and a cluster of people, some still in fake police uniforms, were scrambling to lock the gates. But they weren't fast enough. In less than 10 seconds, the lead SWAT truck had smashed through the main entrance like it was made of cardboard. Officers poured out, rifles drawn, shouting commands with the kind of authority you don't argue with. From my vantage point in the command vehicle, I could see every detail. Thermal imaging confirmed at least a dozen people inside, and several of them were still trying to delete files on computers or shove boxes of documents into a fireplace. Bad move. The SWAT team was already inside before they could even light a match. "Hands where I can see, M." Down on the ground, now, an officer bellowed, his voice carrying over the comms in my earpiece. One by one, the fake cops dropped to the floor, their bravado evaporating. The HOA president, the same smug guy who had ordered the helicopter to be grounded, was face down on the marble lobby floor, wrists zip-tied behind his back. His expensive suit didn't look so impressive when paired with a terrified expression and a bead of sweat rolling down his cheek. Meanwhile, another team stormed the upstairs offices. They found a stash of fake badges, counterfeit citation books, and even a set of custom HOA police uniforms complete with holsters. In one back room, there was a large corkboard covered in aerial photographs of my ranch, notes about my security systems, and printed maps of the surrounding area. It was clear, they'd been planning something bigger for weeks. SWAT didn't waste time. The evidence was bagged and tagged, computers seized, and every single person in that building was read their rights. Outside, I stepped onto the front lawn just as the first group of detainees was led out in a line, hands bound. The media had already arrived. Someone had leaked the operation, and reporters were shouting questions over the flashing of cameras. Is it true the HOA was impersonating law enforcement? Were they targeting the helicopter to stop a rescue mission? How did SWAT get involved so fast? I didn't answer any of them. My focus was on one thing, making sure my pilot, my crew, and everyone involved in the rescue mission were safe and protected from any further harassment. By the time the last suspect was loaded into the transport van, the HOA HQ was nothing more than a crime scene swarming with investigators. I walked past the HOA president as he sat in the back of a van, glaring at me through the cage. I leaned in just enough for him to hear me over the noise. You wanted to stop a rescue? Now you're the one who needs saving, I said calmly before walking away. Later, back at my ranch, the helicopter had safely completed its mission and landed without interference. The rescued individual, a missing hiker, was resting comfortably inside, receiving medical attention. The community that had been terrified of the HOA's intimidation tactics could finally breathe again. Within 48 hours, the entire story hit national news. HOA police became the laughingstock of the country, their name forever tied to one of the dumbest, and most dangerous, fake law enforcement stunts anyone had seen. Charges ranged from impersonating a peace officer to obstruction of an emergency operation, and with the evidence SWAT had collected, there wasn't a chance they'd walk free. Standing on my porch that evening, I watched the sun dip below the horizon. The air was quiet, the ranch peaceful again. But in my gut, I knew this wasn't just about my land or a helicopter, it was about making sure no one ever thought they could play cop, endanger lives, and get away with it. And as far as I was concerned, the message had been delivered loud and clear, courtesy of my SWAT team.